Sir, the Constitution says treason is punishable by death. You've accused your adversaries of treason. Who specifically are you accusing of treason?
Well, I think a number of people, and I think what you look is that they have unsuccessfully tried to take down the wrong person. If you look at Comey, if you look at McCabe, if you look at probably people higher than that, if you look at Strzok, they want an insurance policy so that should she, for any reason, lose, remember, 100 million to 1. Maybe he said 100 million to nothing. But should she lose, we'll have an insurance policy and we'll get this guy out of office. And that's what they said, and that's what they meant. That's treason. That's treason.
Are we recording this?
But I do have a connection that can establish a potential summit between candidate Trump and President Putin.
Here's what I think happened to the United States in the past 8 years.
Wait a minute, I just better be explicit. You surrendered what would have been good money.
Millions.
Got it.
He ended up polarizing the country in a way that brings us close to fascism.
The only politics in this prosecution was on the side of prosecuting General Flynn at all. And I'm convinced now, in particular, that what Attorney General Barr is trying very hard to do is right the ship.
And in accompanying that, trains Republicans to just hate rule of law.
So let's walk down Pennsylvania Avenue. I want to thank you all. God bless you, and God bless America. Thank you all for being here.
And you have to spin up the ball of thread before you can tell the story.
So the Durham investigation. Bill Barr reaches out to Durham even before Mueller's entirely done.
You better take 1 second to tell us who Durham is.
Durham is the special counsel that I appointed to look into how this got going.
Because as he said in his book, he needed to investigate how it all started.
Well, it smells bad, but I'm not going to state what I think
You won't call them criminals, right? All right.
That's for Durham to figure out.
There's no crime. There's no predicate.
We don't even know if this Durham thing is a criminal investigation or what is it.
There is no basis for an investigation, and there is already an Inspector General investigation.
A long-awaited report into the origins of the probe into Russian interference in the 2016 election has found no evidence of a political conspiracy against the president. This report is from the Inspector General at the Department of Justice. The man who heads the Department of Justice, the Attorney General, William Barr, put out a statement that was critical of this, which is interesting.
It is. Interesting is a nice way to put it.
So there's no point to this investigation.
I believe Mueller's stewardship of the investigation was outrageous. All right. I think there were a number of things that I thought were inexcusable.
Nevertheless, Barr goes out to John Durham, at that point was a credible U.S. attorney.
Most notably, he took a hard look at the CIA and the issue of torture and whether any CIA officers should be prosecuted. And he spent a long time digging into that.
And asks him to go look into the start of this investigation.
You mentioned the FBI, but I've always stated from the beginning that this was a CIA-run operation that then fed disinformation to the FBI, whether the FBI willfully or not willfully accepted this information to then obtain warrants.
They start by chasing George Papadopoulos' conspiracy theories.
In fact, it's gone to the extraordinary lengths of having DOJ people question CIA officers about their intelligence estimates. And my sources are saying to me, what expertise do Department of Justice investigators have in how we assess whether Vladimir Putin ordered an operation or not?
He had done this hearing with the Oversight Committee in late 2018.
I testified about this particular issue, among many others, in front of the House Oversight Committee. This man was no Russian agent.
That hearing was substantially him repeating claims that showed up in John Solomon or that showed up in the Daily Caller.
John Solomon joins us along with former Trump campaign aide George Papadaopulus, his wife Simona, who fought so hard for his defense. John, I'll let you break it down.
Sure, yeah, this is really simple.
So they take those claims.
That was all under oath.
Claims like that Joseph Mifsud
was working on behalf of Western intelligence.
Not a Russian asset.
Did you interview Mifsud?
Can't get into that.
Is Mifsud Western intelligence or Russian intelligence?
Can't get into that.
Well, I'm reading from your report. Mifsud told Papadopoulos. Papadopoulos tells the diplomat tells the FBI opens the investigation July 31st, 2016, and here we are 3 years later, July of 2019, the country's been put through this, and the central figure who launches it all lies to us, and you guys don't hunt him down and interview him again, and you don't charge him with a crime. Maybe a better course of action is to figure out how the false accusation started. Maybe it's to go back and actually figure out why Joseph Mifsud was lying to the FBI. And here's the good news. Here's the good news. That's exactly what Bill Barr is doing. And thank goodness for that. That's exactly what the Attorney General and John Durham are doing.
That claim, by the way, came from Mifsud's attorney.
His own lawyer has made unambiguous statements about who he is.
Who is this Russian-connected banker or lawyer in Switzerland. And for the first 8 months of this investigation, Barr and Durham are chasing these conspiracy theories.
We can't forget that the Durham probe started off as an administrative review. The only moment publicly that we knew that it became a criminal matter is after a trip that both Attorney General Barr and John Durham took, not to Russia, but to Italy, to find out about Joseph Mifsud.
They are doing that physically, meaning they're getting on a plane and they're going to Italy. They're getting on a plane and going to the UK and making sure that the UK didn't tell them conspiracy theories. They talked to the Australians.
NBC News has also confirmed a report from the New York Times that President Trump asked the Prime Minister of Australia to help his effort to discredit the Mueller probe.
They are chasing anything they can possibly do.
It's extraordinary, and it sends a message to our allies. Is another thing that my sources are telling me that is deeply concerning. That these senior officials in the U.S. government, whose bidding are they doing? Are they doing Donald Trump's personal political bidding, or are they doing the business of the United States?
One of Barr's top aides says, "Look at this report on Oleg Deripaska, saying that he had dirt on Andrew McCabe."
Oleg Deripaska, not just any, not just any Russian, the Russian.
But Barr, in testimony, has this exchange with Ben Sass. Ben Sass is like, this guy is a dirtbag. We don't want to have anything to do with Oleg Deripaska.
Volume 1, pages 129 to 144 are largely about Deripaska. Can you tell us who he is and what his objectives are?
I'd rather not get into that in this open setting.
And Bill Barr looks unbelievably uncomfortable, as if he has reached out to Oleg Deripaska.
I'd rather not get into that in this open setting.
Maybe we can reach out to Oleg Deripaska.
Well, I'll at least quote the Department of Treasury, because this is a public document. So Oleg Deripaska is a designated individual. He possesses a Russian diplomatic passport. He regularly claims to represent the Russian government. He's an aluminum and other metals billionaire, and he's been investigated by the U.S. government and by other of our allies for money laundering. He's been accused of threatening the lives of his business rivals. He's been charged with illegal wiretapping, taking part in extortion and racketeering schemes. He's bribed government officials. He's ordered the murder of a businessman, and he has many links to Russian organized crime. So I think we can, in an open setting, at least agree that he's a bad dude. Right, this is a bottom-feeding scum sucker, and he has absolutely no. I'll take your laugh as agreement. He has absolutely no alignment with the interests of the U.S. people and our public.
And they go at least consider that.
Very absurd.
We don't know what happened with that. They see a claim from Patrick Byrne that he has some information.
Who is the overstock person, Patrick Byrne? He is a successful businessman who launched Overstock.com back in 1999, and he led the internet retailing company for almost 2 decades. And during that time, Byrne became known for supporting elaborate conspiracy theories. And then in 2019, he resigned as CEO after disclosing his 3-year affair with none other than Russian spy Maria Butina. Byrne issued this company press release referencing the deep state and claiming he, quote, helped the Men in Black, his nickname for FBI agents. Now, with all that newfound free time, Byrne started promoting more conspiracies.
There's a discussion about that. We don't know what ended up with that.
From Trump's perspective, he dodged the bullet on Mueller. There was no clear articulation of criminal charges, criminal conduct by Donald Trump. And yet he's still obsessed with this to the point where he's sending his top officials out around the world to gather information about it.
But Ken, even you can talk about all the conspiracy theories that Donald Trump's chasing, and he wants Rudy Giuliani to go over to Ukraine to chase a conspiracy theory that the Russians weren't involved in that. He's got Barr running around chasing conspiracy theories for him now.
Really importantly, because this is where the Durham investigation overlaps with Rudy's stuff. Durham talks to several Ukrainians, and there's good reason to believe, and I'll get to this when we talk about the Hunter Biden operation, there's good reason to believe the people he talks to are Russian spies.
As I did say to Senator Graham, we have to be very careful with respect to any information coming from the Ukraine. There are a lot of agendas in the Ukraine. There are a lot of cross currents, and we can't take anything we receive from the Ukraine at face value.
First of all, there's a conversation when the whistleblower stuff breaks in September of 2019. Durham's fixers, they're all in a bar together panicking about the whistleblower complaint.
It doesn't matter what I discuss.
President Trump says he did nothing wrong during a phone call with the president of Ukraine.
But I can say that it was a totally appropriate conversation. It was actually a beautiful conversation.
But CBS News has learned the president's dealings with Ukraine are part of a federal whistleblower complaint the Intelligence Community Inspector General determined to be an urgent concern. The exact allegation is unknown because the administration is refusing to turn the complaint over to Congress.
It's a partisan whistleblower.
Barr, from that point forward, is always trying to manage whether or not he spoke to any Ukrainians. He's got this narrow denial, and he's panicked that he will be caught out in a lie. Some of Andrei Derkach's associates are sanctioned in early 2021. Durham takes notice. That is one of the reasons I believe that he is speaking to these Russian assets in 2019. So they consider reaching out to Deripaska.
The bottom-feeding scumsucker.
They consider going to Patrick Byrne.
After his 3-year affair with none other than Russian spy Maria Butina.
They are speaking to these Ukrainians. We don't know which Ukrainians. And they also chase every single George Papadaopulus conspiracy theory.
And what Hunter Biden was up to in 2013 through 2015 in Ukraine leads really into what happened with the Crossfire Hurricane in many ways, and part of the cover-up and why the Democrats and the mainstream media have been so adamant in assuring that the president went through this impeachment trial, why the Bob Mueller investigation metastasized the way it did.
That's the beginning of 2019. In September of 2019, they begin to discover what becomes their primary focus in 2020.
What do you think this tells us and how it advances the ball ahead of maybe a John Durham report?
Well, we already knew that Hillary Clinton did try to smear President Trump, then candidate Trump, with this claim that he was colluding with Russia. That already was known. We discovered that over the course of years, that she was the person behind that her campaign had purchased this operation from a group called Fusion GPS, which contracted with an unregistered foreign agent of a sanctioned Russian oligarch.
There are some materials found in a server in Russia associated with Guccifer 2.0, and there is an allegation that Hillary Clinton wanted to emphasize Donald Trump's ties to Russia. They speak to the same cybersecurity agents who blow the Alpha Bank tip in 2016, and they seem to misrepresent this. They seem to know about this intelligence, which makes sense because they're the ones who would have been investigating Guccifer 2.0, and they misrepresent it.
What this is saying is that Russia believed that she had personally authorized this plan on July 26 or so of 2016, and that U.S. intelligence officials took it so seriously that Russians believed this.
They say it's not that Hillary wants to emphasize Trump's ties, it's that Hillary wants to frame Donald Trump. If it's right, if that comes from the same people, it explains why the FBI fucked up the Alpha Bank allegation.
You might remember it was about logs of internet traffic, logs of communication between different computers on the internet that appeared to show frequent and somewhat inexplicable contact all of a sudden during the presidential campaign between a computer server at the Trump Organization and a computer server at a Russian bank called Alpha Bank,
which suggested there was some kind of communication.
Alpha is the biggest private bank in Russia. They have friendly relations with the Kremlin. You don't get to be big anything in Russia without friendly relations with the Kremlin.
Because the guys who investigated it believed that Hillary Clinton was trying to frame Donald Trump.
Truth is that they are covering up that Hillary Clinton colluded with the Russians to get dirt on Trump, to feed it to the FBI, to open up an investigation into the other campaign.
And it explains everything about the Sussman allegations.
We charged Mr. Sussman with having knowingly provided false information to the FBI regarding Alpha Bank.
Durham learns about that in September of 2019. He and Barr think it's a smoking gun.
And it is sad, it is the biggest corruption, abuse of power scandal in our history.
Michael Horowitz is coming to his conclusion in November of 2019.
It finds that it was a properly predicated investigation based on the rules at the FBI.
He shares his conclusions with Barr and, I guess, Durham, and they are trying to desperately persuade Horowitz to come to a different conclusion.
And you also sought to get the Inspector General to change his conclusion, did you not? When he was concluding that the investigation was properly predicated, did you privately seek to intervene to change that conclusion?
This is outside the scope of the report, but if you want to go there.
And they shared this allegation from the Guccifer materials that Hillary wanted to emphasize Trump's Russian ties. They misrepresent it.
We asked the Inspector General to take a look at the intelligence that's included in the classified appendix that you looked at, and said that ought to affect portions of his report.
Michael Horowitz is like, WTF, this doesn't affect my conclusions at all. This is flimsy. This is nothing. And from that point forward, Barr and Durham are a bit stuck because they were relying on Michael Horowitz to come up with some smoking guns. He doesn't. They publicly refute Michael Horowitz.
And in fact, Durham made the striking statement today where he said this: based on the evidence collected to date, and while our investigation is ongoing, last month we advised the Inspector General that we do not agree with some of the report's conclusions as to predication and how the FBI case was opened. Again, it's just a very striking point where a U.S. attorney, who theoretically is underneath the Inspector General, seems to be openly criticizing the Inspector General.
Really, it's a Russian disinformation effort.
Russia believed that she had personally authorized this plan on July 26 or so of 2016, and that U.S. intelligence officials took it so seriously that Russians believed this.
They thought that it should persuade Michael Horowitz. It doesn't. So their conspiracy theories come to naught.
This is so sad, and the media ignoring this. This dragged the entire country through hell for 3 long years.
They spend all of 2000 trying to fabricate what the Guccifer materials say. They say it says more than it actually says. It actually says Hillary wants to emphasize Donald Trump's Russian ties.
They further believe that this was done to distract from her own scandal.
It's not in the intelligence at all. But they said that to suggest Donald Trump had ties to Russia, you'd have to fabricate that.
Overall, Trump has done significant business with Russians, and the level of business amounts to hundreds of millions of dollars that he received as a result of interaction with Russian businessmen.
Hundreds of millions of dollars from Russian businessmen.
Correct.
So he likes Russia because there's money to be made there.
He likes Russia because he likes beautiful Russian ladies, and he likes talking to them, of course, and he likes to be able to make a lot of money with Russians. Yes, correct.
And so they looked at the Alpha Bank stuff, they looked at the dossier, they looked at everything that came next, and assumed that Hillary Clinton, to establish a tie between Russia and Trump, would have to fabricate stuff.
I will tell you this.
I'm like, well, first of all, even if it were true, it's not a smoking gun, because once Donald Trump invited Russia to hack her.
Russia, if you're listening, I hope you're able to find the 30,000 emails that are missing. I think you will probably be rewarded mightily by our press. Let's see if that happens. That'll be next.
It is completely just to say you're lying about your business ties to Russia, you've invited Russia to hacker, and you've got laundering ties with Russia going back decades, right?
Quote, whether Trump knew it or not, Russian mobsters and corrupt oligarchs used Trump's properties not only to launder vast sums of money from extortion, drugs, gambling, and racketeering, but even as a base of operations for their criminal activities.
And you also are trying to undermine NATO.
I think NATO may be obsolete. And NATO was set up a long time ago, many, many years ago when things were different. Things are different now.
You don't need to invent anything with Donald Trump.
I will tell you that President Putin was extremely strong and powerful in his denial today. And what he did is an incredible offer. He offered to have the people working on the case come and work with their investigators with respect to the 12 people. I think that's an incredible offer. Okay, thank you.
But here's the logic to it. This is why this is important for Bill Barr. This is why it's important for Donald Trump, right? Because to feed the conspiracy theory, Trump has to be aggrieved. He not only has to discredit the Mueller investigation, which is what Bill Barr sent out to do when he returned to government, but he has to turn Joe Biden and Hillary Clinton into the villains of this story. Joe Biden, Hillary Clinton, and Peter Strzok. And so this is an effort to take a political race, first the Hillary Trump and then the Biden Trump, and turn them into these battles of good versus evil.
Hillary Clinton.
She went to your wedding, right?
Well, she did. She did. She did. In a certain way, evil. In a certain way, evil.
And we're already seeing that today. We're like, Trump took the information that the Iranians sent Kamala Harris staffers, which they didn't even look at because it looked like a fish. They're now claiming that that means Kamala Harris was wiretapping Trump, right?
Despite a lack of evidence, the Trump campaign is now accusing the Harris campaign of illegally spying on it, while accusing President Biden of working with Iran without any evidence.
It's insane because if you apply that logic, it means that Donald Trump was wiretapping Hillary Clinton.
I personally will not be talking about any revelations that come about solely as a result of WikiLeaks.
If using somebody's stolen documents in the or even receiving somebody's stolen documents in the campaign is wiretapping, then Donald Trump wiretapped the fuck out of Hillary Clinton.
WikiLeaks! WikiLeaks! I love WikiLeaks. As confirmed just today by WikiLeaks. Boy, that WikiLeaks has done a job on her, hasn't it?
Certainly his rubes aren't going to understand that. Nobody in the press is calling that out. But Donald Trump is transforming these political campaigns into this legal grievance. Donald Trump, even though on paper he shouldn't be the victim here, he has to flip that.
Everything they're doing to me is about preserving their power and control over the American people. If I renounce my beliefs, if I agreed to stay silent, if I stayed at home, if I said I'm not going to run, the persecution would stop immediately. They'd go on to the next victim. Who's next? But they'll never, ever do what they did to me.
They falsely claim that it says Hillary Clinton wants to frame Donald Trump. They spent 2020 chasing that. Before the election in 2020, around the same time that Barr is inventing propaganda related to Mike Flynn, in that same period, Nora Danahue is the lead prosecutor for John Durham quits.
I had never been asked to write a report about an investigation that was not yet complete. I then saw a version of a draft report, the conclusions of which I strongly disagreed with. Writing a report, and particularly the draft I saw, violated long-standing principles of the Department of Justice. Furthermore, the Department of Justice has a long-standing policy of not taking any public actions in the time leading up to an election that might influence that election. I simply couldn't be part of it, so I resigned. It was the most difficult personal and professional decision I've had to make.
It is shared with the press, and people figure out that Barr and Durham were going to try something, and his lead prosecutor, Andrew DeFilippis, and they were going to try and release an interim report, basically, before the election.
And so here comes a career person from DOJ working for John Durham, who now essentially is a kind of whistleblower in silence, meaning, you know, she's quietly resigned because of her perhaps professionalism and not wanting to draw herself into politics. And now we find out, according to the Hartford Courant, it's because they're being pressured. This concept of pressure is a theme throughout the Trump administration.
And Dennehy's like, no, you're not going to do this, and we haven't come to this conclusion anyway. That prevents them from releasing that report. Barr secretly makes Durham a special counsel.
Yeah, it looks like 2016 is never going to be over. John Durham, of course, would be one of those people that might have to leave office once Joe Biden takes the helm at the White House. It means that John Durham can remain as special counsel, continuing this investigation. According to the Justice Department, they say that the Attorney General made the appointment in October, but did not want to release that information in order to not affect the election.
Okay, so that's October of 2020, and the investigation continues. And in that next year, Durham puts together two false statements cases, one against Michael Sussman.
Last month, special counsel John Durham brought a criminal charge against that lawyer who brought the data to the FBI, saying the lawyer did not consistently explain whether he was acting on behalf of a client when he brought the FBI that data, or if he was acting on his own. He's a former national security lawyer from the Justice Department, like with a, security clearance and everything, who's worked on serious national security cases in the past. He goes back to his colleagues at the FBI and says, this is going to end up in the press and this has implications. You guys ought to look at it. Do they care on whose behalf or anyone's he brought it in? I don't know. But that's the charge John Durham made against this guy, and that will ultimately be for a jury to decide, not you or me.
Claiming that when he came to the FBI with the Alpha Bank allegations, he knowingly lied and knowingly hid his tie to Hillary Clinton.
You want to add one thing? Go ahead.
I just wanted to say that if it was me that went into the FBI as Donald Trump's attorney and said, I have information, but it's not on behalf of my client, who would believe me? That's what happened. And then there was an investigation and FISA warrants. Eric Trump, Donald Trump, Ivanka. We'd all be in jail. That would be what would happen.
Wouldn't even be close. We do not have equal justice under the law in this country anymore.
This is consistent with their notion that Hillary Clinton was trying to frame Donald Trump.
We're getting all this information, but it seems like a lot of people are getting away with some seriously bad activity.
And then they go after Igor Danchenko, who is the primary subsource for Christopher Steele.
He hired a suspected Russian spy to create that dossier.
And they claim that Danchenko falsely told Steele that he believed he spoke to Sergei Milyan in a call in July of 2016. That's 4 of the 5 charges against Danchenko.
His name is Igor Danchenko. He's a Russian-born analyst living in the United States, and he was interviewed back in 2017 by the FBI about his contributions to that Christopher Steele dossier. And what he told the FBI was that he provided raw intelligence to Christopher Steele about things that were essentially rumors, including that salacious allegation about a sex tape in the Ritz-Carlton Hotel in Moscow.
And the 5th charge is that this guy, Chuck Dolan, who had a very distant tie to
Hillary Clinton, where this all connects to.
Basically, through Danchenko's intervention, Dolan meets Galkina, who is the source for the Michael Cohen allegations in the Steele dossier.
The famous Christopher Steele dossier alleges that Michael Cohen was an important channel on Russian election interference, that he coordinated with the Russians, and that he went over to do some damage control in 2016 and met with Russians in Europe.
Durham builds a charge, a crazy charge, that narrowly says when Danchenko was asked if Dolan told him anything about the dossier, Danchenko said, No.
Special counsel John Durham alleged Danchenko lied to an FBI agent when he said he hadn't, quote, talked to a Democratic political operative named Charles Dolan about the Steele dossier.
But to even get there, Durham had to misrepresent the question.
Dolan gave Danchenko information that ended up in the dossier, but the two communicated via email. They didn't talk.
So there's 4 charges tied to Sergei Millian, and the 5th charge is this really Byzantine allegation that because Danchenko did not offer up that Dolan was the source for a true story that was based off a political story that Dolan read, because Danchenko didn't offer that up, it meant that he was hiding Dolan's role, which doesn't exist, in being the source for the P tape, among other things. So the indictment itself is a conspiracy theory.
On paper, this case is about Igor Danchenko, but over the course of the week inside the courtroom, it became clear John Durham's focus was on the FBI itself.
It is a theory of conspiracy, and it is also a conspiracy theory that Dolan is the source for the P tape, Hillary Clinton is the source for the P tape.
Hillary Clinton, where this all connects to.
That she's feeding dirt into Christopher Steele, even though that she didn't know. I mean, the whole thing is flimsy and ridiculous, but Durham does it to create a kind of the possibility for a smoking gun.
The highest echelons of the FBI, the DNC lawyers, the Clinton lawyers, they were all working together. They were leaking this stuff to the media. They were using it to commit crimes in front of the FISA court. This is the greatest dirty trick in American political history.
And what he does when he has both of these indictments, the first one was in September of 2021, literally days before the statute of limitations would run out, and then the other one was a couple of months later. At the time that Durham charged these, and this is similar, by the way, to David Weiss when we get to Hunter Biden, but at the time Durham charged these, he hadn't even looked, he hadn't even gone to Michael Horowitz and said, can I get the evidence that you have? He didn't know that there were documents. He had never gone to Jim Baker, who was his primary witness in the Michael Sussman case, and said, he never gave him a subpoena. He never said, give me all your communications with Michael Sussman. So it wasn't until months later that he discovered his whole case was bunk.
When John Durham was appointed by then Attorney General Bill Barr during the Trump administration, it was a time when then President Trump was talking a lot about the people who investigated him and making a lot of dark and shadowy allegations about the origins of this investigation. And Durham was supposed to get to the bottom of all that and bring to justice any FBI employees who engaged in wrongdoing, and also to investigate members of the intelligence community who might have engaged in wrongdoing. In fact, in this case against Michael Sussman, the FBI was a victim, was an alleged victim of Sussman's lie, not the perpetrator of a crime.
But nevertheless, he used both of these, and we call them talking indictments because the charge is very narrow. And he spins up these conspiracies based on them, right?
Many legal scholars noted that in your filings, you laid out not just the prosecution for the court to consider, but you appeared to be alleging a conspiracy that you did not intend to prosecute. Rather than indicting Mr. Sussman on the narrow charge of lying to the FBI, this is a charge which a unanimous jury of his peers acquitted him of, your filing broadly alleges a vast Clinton conspiracy identifying various individuals, and at least one of whom you never prosecuted. And after the Sussman indictment was filed on September 16th of 2021, for example, President Trump's allies used the broad conclusions you allege to construct a political narrative damaging the reputations of uncharged individuals.
The charges that Sussman didn't reveal that he had ties to the Democrats, even though everyone at the FBI knew that because he had been cooperating with them for months on the hack and leak.
Mr. Baker admitted that he is a friend of Michael Sussman. He knew he worked for the DNC. He knew he also happened to be Hillary Clinton's campaign general counsel.
So Durham claims that he hid his tie to the Democrat and turns that into this case that the Democrats were wiretapping Donald Trump.
And then when President Trump became president, they continued to spy on him at the executive office of president.
They were spying on the sitting president of the United States.
Hillary Clinton's campaign paid to spy on Donald Trump.
The silence by most of the media is very revealing.
That's how far that goes.
But the filing does not back up the claim the Clinton campaign paid to have then-President Trump spied on.
Michael Sussman went to the CIA and said, you guys need to research this. There's very good reason to believe that these allegations were found to be important.
After Republicans on the House Intelligence Committee announced that they had found no evidence of collusion between the Trump campaign and Russia, the committee's Democrats filed a dissent, arguing that there were many matters still to be investigated, including the Trump organization's connections to Alpha Bank.
There were two sets of DNS allegations, right? The first one, which is the famous one, which is that Alpha Bank and Trump Tower and Spectrum Health, our local business, which suggested there was some kind of communication. There was a second one, though, which was that there were lookups for Yodaphone.
A phone made in Russia and made famous by the fact that it has two screens, a familiar 720p LCD on the front and an e-reader style display on the back.
The Yodaphone is a Russian phone company, and within Russia, it works like a cell phone, but outside of Russia, it can only work as a Wi-Fi-based communications device.
But with the bad battery life, with the slightly iffy build quality around the edges, and most importantly with the lack of software support for mainstream Android apps, it's probably worth holding off to see if Yota devices can win over third-party developers.
And so the logic was if you had Yodaphone lookups in the United States, people who had a Yodaphone were trying to basically phone home to a Russian server, and the only way to do that was through the internet. And it was good logic. And what happened was the research that these researchers at Georgia Tech were doing was grossly misrepresented. Durham is trying to build this case against a guy by the name of Rodney Jaffe, who is the source of all of these records.
The thing that amazes me is that there's new characters sort of appearing that most people that were doing this research, frankly, were not aware of at all. Like, for example, Jaffe is someone that myself talking to a number of people who are deeply involved in these investigations, including Kash Patel, which we talked about this on Kash's Corner, just simply wasn't aware of him being involved. At the same time, this character, he's got unbelievable levels of access to what's supposed to be in an incredibly secure setting, right? Like ostensibly in the White House. So who is this guy?
And if you're Russia, you love this. If you're Russia, what you're doing is you're literally trying to criminalize some of your key cybersecurity researchers and trying to criminalize somebody who's been a key partner in both law enforcement and intelligence for years.
Little side note is in 2013, Jim Comey awarded Rodney Jaffe the FBI Director's Award for, I think, cybersecurity or something like that.
So there were two pieces of research that happened on the Alpha Bank stuff. One was at a conference in June of 2016, just after the Washington Post broke the news of the hacking, a bunch of security people are together and they're like, let's see what it looks like. No tie to Hillary Clinton. Let's see what it looks like. And that's where they first found the Alpha Bank stuff, right? And so it's after Trump says,
Russia, if you're listening,
where they start saying, we seem to be on something because Trump is denying having
significant business with Russians.
And one of these researchers lays out stuff that she's sort of just brainstorming. She's like, what if one of the son-in-laws for Alpha Bank has a tie to Trump? And sure enough, we learn a year and a half later that the son-in-law for one of the Alpha Bank founders is involved in Paul Manafort's cover-up of his Ukraine stuff.
For what it's worth, I should tell you that one of the billionaire founders of Alpha Bank has a daughter. Not that long ago, his daughter married Alex van der Zwaan. Crazy, right? One of the only people who's gone to jail so far in the Mueller investigation. Probably all just a big coinky-dink.
So, these all turn out to be true. She's like, what if one of Trump's people is laundering money through Cyprus? Guess where Paul Manafort laundered his money through.
There was a lot of money involved, including $18.9 million to buy a Ukrainian media company for Oleg Deripaska, who, according to WikiLeaks, State Department officials described as one of 2 to 3 oligarchs Putin turns to on a regular basis. Documents from a legal action show that some of that money from Deripaska went to a Manafort-linked company in Cyprus.
So she ends up being right, but Durham nevertheless tries to criminalize this because he believes that she and Rodney Joffe together made up DNS records as an effort to frame Trump.
And in fact, they were discussing the fact that they wanted to shape an anti-Trump narrative in their emails, which Durham got hold of and which Durham cites in his filing. So they were shaping a narrative in order to kind of trick the FBI into thinking this is really serious stuff. And that's a conspiracy to lie to the FBI, and that's going to be a real problem for them.
Oh, fascinating.
All we're doing is basically finding the footprints of people who have Yoda phones turned on in the United States. And they end up finding some using the same IP address associated with Spectrum Health in Michigan during the period of the Russian operation. They end up finding like 2 or 3 others in the United States, but they also end up finding one inside basically the office, the
executive office of president. And then when President Trump became president, they continued to spy on him at the executive office of president.
So inside the White House's office building. But the way in which Durham did his investigation is when he asked experts to assess it, he kept information from them so they couldn't assess everything that was in front of him.
I'm wondering, did you take a look at how the FBI evaluated the alleged ties to Alpha Bank? Did you hire cyber experts to actually take a look at those potential or alleged ties?
Yes. Well, I didn't hire them. They were FBI experts.
My question was, did you take a look, did you hire experts to evaluate the FBI's evaluation?
I did not hire experts to examine what the experts said, no.
But in any case, they found that there was a Yoda phone inside the White House, and the way in which Durham released it, the way in which Durham revealed it in a court filing, made it look like the Georgia Tech researchers had found a Yoda phone in the White House after Trump took over.
Hillary Clinton and her campaign set up President Trump during his campaign and after he won the presidency in 2016 and 17. Special counsel John Durham's latest filing on the Russia collusion lie reveals the Clinton campaign paid a government-contracted technology company to intercept and spy on President Trump before and during his time as president.
That's absolute bullshit, absolute manufactured bullshit. Completely made up. But nevertheless...
Do you remember when I said years ago, I think they spied in my campaign, and everybody said on the other side, how dare he say that? How dare he? Well, it turned out to be true. And I want to thank John Durham for figuring that out.
Go back. It's circular. Remember the Louise Mensch claim going back to 2016?
Yes, what I reported was that my sources said, I should say at the outset, I don't have a piece of paper with the FISA warrant in front of me, that a warrant was granted on the communications between 2 Russian banks. And specifically, permission was granted to the FBI to look at U.S. persons incidentally caught up in that investigation.
Durham is saying, yes, they actually were surveilling you inside the White House because they found this Yoda phone in the White House. What he doesn't say is that the Yoda phone, they're tracking it starting in 2015. If he was spying on a president, he was spying on Barack Obama, not Donald Trump.
It has been a constant stream of gripes and grievances that's actually been getting worse now that he's afraid of losing to Kamala.
And Donald Trump, in fact, turned off the service that they would have been able to track that DNS records after he became president. So if he did end up having a Yoda phone in the pocket, they would never have found it because that service was turned off.
I hope that John Durham, bless his heart for sticking with this, is not content to pursue only Michael Sussman, a low-level Clinton operative.
The Igor Danchenko prosecution, it's fucking hilarious. As soon as I looked at it, I'm like, John Durham relied on Sergey Million's Twitter account as a source.
And why did Mr. Trump want your help?
Because Trump team, they realized that we have a lot of connection with Russian investors, and they noticed that we bring a lot of investors from Russia.
And I'm like, this is never going to be admissible in trial. How in hell's name did you rely on this for an indictment? I said that right away. And I said to Sergey Millian, who is still talking to me on Twitter, I said, Sergey, you're going to have to come and testify.
Absolutely no.
Durham eventually did try and ask Sergey Millian to come to the United States to testify, and of course Sergey Millian refused.
So I'm not involved.
Not involved.
Durham ignored much of the really damning information about Sergey Millian that comes from George Papadaopulus. He pointedly never interviewed George Papadaopulus, and then still treated Sergey Millian as a credible source.
So you became the official broker for Donald Trump?
I became the official broker for Trump Hollywood.
Even though basically Mueller had said, we think he might be part of this information operation, he's certainly acting like he's trying to cultivate George Papadaopulus, but we can't do anything about it because he's fled the country. By the way, Sergey Millian has ties to a woman who was charged in SDNY in the aftermath of the Ukraine investigation. He shows up there. He shows up there not registering under FARA and recognizing that he probably should. So Durham treats Sergey Millian as reliable. And then Sergey says, no, I'm not coming to the United States. And I'm like, you just got used. You just got embarrassingly used by this guy.
Are you involved in any way with Russian intelligence agencies?
Absolutely no.
You've heard that, right?
Of course.
What do you say?
So I'm not involved.
Not involved? Do you ever report back to them?
Absolutely no.
Do they ever ask you questions or?
No.
But you have friends inside the government, don't you?
Of course.
Do they ever ask you what's going on in American politics?
Yes.
So Millian was communicating via internet at that point, and Durham never had the ability to discount communications between Millian and Danchenko. Had no ability to do that because he didn't get either one of their phones. So even if it were true, he didn't have the evidence to charge it. He nevertheless charged it.
We are nearing the end of the trial of the Russian national accused of lying to the FBI about the Steele dossier. The case will go to the jury next week with one of the 5 counts already decided.
He takes the claim that Danchenko was not fully forthcoming about his ties to Dolan, which, by the way, that charge was ultimately thrown out.
This comes as the federal judge in the case threw out an important charge against the man actually on trial. Russian national Igor Danchenko will now face only 4 counts of lying to the FBI after the federal judge in the case removed the first count over a technicality.
Because as charged, Danchenko was charged with telling the truth. Like he was accused of lying when in fact he told the truth because of the question that was asked.
Dolan gave Danchenko information that ended up in the dossier, but the two communicated via email. They didn't talk.
That turns into this conspiracy that Danchenko was a Russian spy and he invented all of these claims about Christopher Steele.
Special Agent Kevin Helson, a government witness, bucked Special Counsel John Durham's case, telling jurors Igor Danchenko was a valuable informant, adding American national security is more at risk without Danchenko still working for the Bureau. He claimed Danchenko helped the Bureau with around some 25 investigations. And Danchenko's attorneys told the judge today, Brett, they're not even going to put on a case.
Then the Chuck Dolan thing again.
Special Counsel John Durham alleged Danchenko lied to an FBI agent when he said he hadn't, quote, talked to a Democratic political operative named Charles Dolan about the Steele dossier.
He spun from Chuck Dolan sharing his rumor, something that was truly reported in the Politico, as the smoking gun that Chuck Dolan was the source for the P-tape, even though we have the specific names of the people to whom Danchenko attributed the P-tape allegation to, even though the Senate intelligence report found 4 allegations that are very similar to the P-tape. The P-tape is real, effectively, but also who cares, because Russia does this to everybody.
I'd like to add something to this. After all, I was an intelligence officer myself.
So rather than focusing on the people who were genuinely Danchenko's sources, Oleg Alkina in the case of the Cohen stuff and these known Russians in the case of the P-tape. He puts Chuck Dolan at the center of that, and it turns into this effort to fabricate information about Donald Trump, even though Hillary Clinton never knew the details about the Steele dossier. She wasn't in that loop, right? Mark Elias was the only one in that loop. And so that's what he does. He creates, with these talking indictments, very simple false statements charges, theories of conspiracy, and he never gets anywhere.
When he could not give Donald Trump evidence of a deep state conspiracy, Mr. Durham gave him the next best thing, a public narrative with Hillary Clinton as the villain. Over the ensuing years, Mr. Durham constructed a flimsy story built on shaky inferences and dog whistles to far-right conspiracy theorists. Although he lost both times, he took a case to trial. By prolonging his investigation, Durham was able to keep Donald Trump's talking points in the news long after Trump left office.
I think he thought that he would get Rodney Joffe to flip on Michael Sussman. I think he thought that he would be able to use the trial to breach privilege on some of the Fusion emails. He did. He found the exact opposite of what he thought he was. He found out, in fact, that it was what they said, that the people that he was claiming were at the core of the conspiracy were really unconnected to what Michael Sussman was doing. He never told the truth about that.
It appears the special counsel's endgame is something other than a sweeping indictment. You got 3. You think he's done?
Well, he may have some more, Bill, but I think it'll be in the nature of people who lied to investigators, just like these last bunch. And the thing is, if you were going to have a big sweeping indictment here, the government would have to be in on it, right? It would be, the most sinister interpretation of this is that it was a government plot along with the Clinton campaign to undermine Trump. But Durham's theory appears to be that the FBI was duped. And that comes on the heels of Attorney General Barr at the end of the Trump administration saying that, Obama was not a suspect, Biden was not a suspect. Then before they interviewed CIA Director Brennan, they said he was not a subject of the investigation. So I don't really see, I see a lot of incompetence here, and you can even say malevolence, but I don't think Durham is saying that rose to the level of...
He found proof after proof after proof after proof he was wrong, and he nevertheless pursued the cases, and they ended up in acquittal.
Another loss for special counsel John Durham. Igor Danchenko is acquitted. Danchenko, of course, private researcher who was the original source of the discredited Steele dossier, filled with outrageous allegations against former President Trump. Jury in Alexandria, Virginia, of course, found him not guilty of lying to the FBI about where he got that discredited information. After the break, famed actor John Schneider joining the show to discuss his new pro-America film, one that the major studios wouldn't dream of touching in woke Hollywood.
Durham, to the end, as we see in his hearing, to the end, he still would not give up his conspiracy theories.
None of the individuals you prosecuted were ever charged with being part of a hoax or a fraud or a witch hunt or a politically motivated deep state conspiracy against Donald Trump. Isn't that correct?
I would not say that that's accurate.
You mean you did charge somebody with being a part of a hoax?
We charged Mr. Sussman with having knowingly provided false information to the FBI regarding Alpha Bank.
But he was acquitted, though, right?
Well, that wasn't your question.
Mr. Sussman was acquitted after you charged him, correct?
Grand jury found
he was found innocent by a unanimous jury of 12.
That's not true.
Well,
what's true is the grand jury found probable cause to indict Mr. Sussman.
A jury of his peers acquitted him, though, correct?
And a trial jury.
You're not going to disagree on that, are you, Mr. Durham?
Even though 2 juries told him he was wrong, and even though there's plenty of counter evidence that he made it up.
Well, Mr. Durham, was that what you were doing?
I'm sorry, is that what?
Was finding out who Mifsud was what you were doing?
We pursued that avenue, yes.
Right, but was he... This whole thing was an op, Mr. Durham. This wasn't like a bumbling, fumbling FBI that couldn't get FISA straight. They ran an op. So who put Mifsud in play? You don't know, do you?
I do not know that. I can't give you the
For
answer.
years, you had years to find out the answer to what Mr. Jordan said was the seminal question, and you don't have it. And it just begs the question whether or not you were really trying to find that out. Because it's one thing to criticize the FBI for their FISA violations, to write a report. They've been criticized in plenty of reports. Some have referred to your work as just a repackaging and regurgitation of what the Inspector General already told us. So if you weren't going to do what Mr. Jordan said you were going to do in that video and give us the basis for all of it, what's this all been about?
Well, I'm not exactly sure the import of your question.
And so that is it. First, you chase George Papadaopulus conspiracy theories. That fails. Then you chase the Hillary Clinton fabrication, this notion that Hillary Clinton was framing Donald Trump generally. That goes nowhere. And then after that, you use these two speaking indictments. Durham did think maybe he could prove a conspiracy.
Mr. Durham, you can hold yourself out as an objective Department of Justice official or as a partisan hack. And the more that you try to spin the facts and not answer my questions, you sound like the latter. So I'm just going to ask this simply. Trump's former National Security Advisor, Michael Flynn, was convicted, correct?
That's correct.
Trump's longtime advisor, Roger Stone, was convicted, correct?
I'm sorry, missed the last thing you
Trump's
mentioned.
longtime advisor, Roger Stone, was convicted, correct?
Correct.
In contrast to multiple Trump associates who were convicted, you brought two cases of jury trial based on this investigation, and you lost both. And so I don't actually know what we're doing here, because the author of the Durham report concedes that the FBI had enough information to investigate, and thank goodness the FBI did.
But when that failed, he just used these speaking indictments as clothes hangers to throw a bunch of actual conspiracy theories onto. And Trump runs with that.
I want to thank John Durham for figuring that out. And I believe that's just a foundation on which a lot of very bad things are going to be learned about what took place.
All of the frothers.
It is stunning, it is damning, it is salacious, and it's a bunch of crap.
Fox News runs with it.
Watergate was a bunch of ham-fisted burglars, up to sort of political dirty tricks. This is spying on an American president. I mean, I hope this goes up the ranks.
That is the basis by which they claim that Hillary Clinton framed Donald Trump. But it is fundamental, right, in what comes next, because this becomes faith on the part of everybody on the right. Right? It is faith that Hillary Clinton framed Donald Trump. Absolute faith that Hillary Clinton, that Michael Sussman, that Christopher Steele came in attempting to frame Donald Trump rather than attempting to understand all the weird Russian stuff that was going on in 2016. That's how you turn Hillary from the victim into the villain. And that is the fundamental movement of John Durham. And John Durham, I think, still believes that he's proven that Hillary Clinton was the villain. And he does that, again, significantly by ignoring all the substance of what Mueller actually discovered. This is the key nugget in this whole series, which is that Donald Trump uses his DOJ to lead all Republicans to believe something absolutely the inverse of the truths, right? He believes like he's turned Hillary Clinton to the maximal villain when in fact she was the victim of a hack and leak campaign that Donald Trump exacerbated. And that is the basis for the belief. That is the basis for the polarization that Donald Trump causes. And oh, by the way, in the process, it does damage to the DNS allegations. It does damage if Danchenko is a good FBI source, it makes him useless. They burn him. They continue to burn Russian experts. They continue, like at every stage in this effort to turn Hillary Clinton into the villain, Donald Trump is burning U.S. resources on Russia to smithereens.
It is what you would expect in third world countries.
The Durham investigation did grave harm to the efforts to track Russian information operations in the United States. And it did so as to discredit the Russian investigation, so as to criminalize being a victim of Russia's information operation, so as to criminalize Hillary Clinton, basically. This is why it's important. Durham's testimony.
I don't know anything about that. There's nothing in the report about it. It's not something we investigated.
You disappear all of the stuff that is incredibly damning. You disappear.
Russia, if you're listening.
and you replace it with these allegations about Igor Danchenko being a double agent, or you replace it with these allegations that the people doing the DNS research, which has been incredibly valuable for the intelligence community and which Russia has been targeting since 2013, you discredit those researchers and invent false claims that they've wiretapped the president.
Thanks for listening to Ball of Thread. Expect a new episode about every 2 weeks until the election. To support this series and get answers to your questions with a bonus Q&A podcast, go to patreon.com/balloffthread. You can join us for as little as $1 a month. We appreciate your sharing this work with anyone who cares about the Constitution, and please consider giving us a 5-star rating wherever you get your podcasts.